So moving forward to a different theme now, and we've been talking a lot about the application process, and we're hearing some jargon like statements of intent. We're going to move forward to what to consider when applying to graduate programs. So I know that for some graduate school applications, they require individuals to apply through the Ontario University Application Centre, or OUAC. Do all graduate programs have the same application process?
That's a really, really good question. And fortunately, the answer is no. The application processes for grad programs are notoriously different program to program. So the OUAC, as you mentioned, would be the same application place where you would have applied to university in the beginning. There are some programs that do go through the OAC, which would be like med school, rehab sciences, professional programs, teacher education, law school, as examples. Now with those are pretty standardized applications. So it'll be a really familiar platform that you'll be working on. However, for every other program, the application process goes through a specific application portal of each school. So if you're applying to 3 different schools, you're going to be opening 3 different application portal accounts for each of those schools and following their instructions.
This is good to know, looking through, researching, and having to go through their websites and to actually read through their application process. And just as a follow-up question, how would you suggest individuals research or actually plan out their grad school applications in light of knowing that not all of the schools go through the same process?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think this is one of the most important elements of preparing graduate school applications because as you go through and you're doing your research, at least I know with myself, and I've seen other folks, be looking at multiple programs at the same time and evaluating those programs. So it's easy to get lost in terms of what program requires what in terms of the application. So what we've done, actually, we created a spreadsheet to help with further ed research that's available on our website. And it's already set up, and you can kind of input the schools that you're considering, and then filling in kind of what the application deadline is, what the direct link is to the application portal. It'll kind of prompt you for inputting all the information you need to know, how many references you need, the questions, the personal statement, like, et cetera. You kind of get the picture. And I would suggest something like that because that really helps ensure that you don't miss any parts of the application. We know from talking to graduate admission advisors that unfortunately every year there are quite a few applications that get sent in where the application is not complete. So it's really, really important to ensure that you read, reread, and keep your schools separate in terms of what their requirements are.
That is such great advice, and I didn't even know that they had the SSC has this resource on hand. So that is really useful.
Yeah, it's a really common issue. So we recommend using that during the research phase of like identifying which schools like maybe are best to strategically apply to, perhaps identifying where the minimum or average GPA that's accepted, let's say, so you can kind of compare everything and even prerequisites all in one spot. But certainly as you move through the process and you start narrowing down what options you're going to apply to, that Excel sheet comes in incredibly handy.
I bet it would. And I guess to even go further down in that route of using the spreadsheet and understanding the application process, I understand that there are some similar documents or requirements that applications will go through and ask of students. Do you think you would be able to go through some of these documentations, such as CV and resume, personal statement and intent, and for any tips reading these out? And for some additional context, I know that some people don't really know the difference between a CV and a resume. Can you explain these differences?
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely do that. Yeah, starting with that CV versus resume, that's one of the really super common questions we get asked because going back earlier to what I mentioned, that every application to every school is different. So because they're not standardized, everybody tends to use different terms. So on one application, they might ask for like a resume slash CV. Another one, they might just ask for a resume. Another one, they might use a term CV. So you really need to know the kind of document that they're looking for. So briefly, the difference is a CV is short for curriculum vitae. It's generally an academic document, or sorry, a document that outlines sort of your academic history, basically everything you've done. So it usually focuses on academic accomplishments, teaching experience, research experience, and what they call service, which is basically helping with like university led say conferences, or like being part of like a faculty hiring committee, let's say. That would be considered like service to your university community. So on that document, it's pretty typical to be used to programs that have a research focus, because in addition to those other things, a typical CV would also include perhaps publications that the individual has done, awards, scholarships, presentations that they might have done, sharing their research, let's say. So we do have a document on our website as well that identifies the differences. So I might recommend that you take a look at that as well. But in contrast, the resume is just like a regular job resume. So it's going to outline your work experience, your education, as typically as you would to apply to an employment position. However, when you get to graduate programs, what often happens is, for most people, that it's often a bit of a blend when you apply, especially if you're applying right out of undergrad. So it may not be that common for an undergraduate student to already have, say, something like a publication. They may have some research experience and maybe a TA-ship, which would be great. And so they can maybe follow more of the traditional CV guidelines. But for many undergraduate students, when they submit their document, their CV / resume is going to look more like an academic resume, and that's usually how I describe it. So don't panic if you don't have those other elements of kind of academic accomplishment. It's okay. Consider what you do have. So we usually suggest sort of fleshing out some of your relevant projects on your resume / CV. We might suggest highlighting some of your marks, certainly relevant experience, and probably your extracurricular. But yeah, think about the ways you can kind of target to that academic focus and to show that you have that academic ability. So kind of it ends up being a bit of a mix. So we do offer consultations as well, so we're happy to help with that too. Okay, but if you're really if one is really unsure about like kind of what exactly document they're looking for, then you can always connect with the admissions committee and get some additional advice.
It's very eye-opening, I must say, personally, about
Oh,
CV
really?
and
Yeah.
resume. Yeah. And do you mind elaborating a little bit more about personal statement and intent, and what applications might be looking for with this document?
Yeah. So the terms are used, like there's different terms that are used for different types of programs. So that's one thing to note. So usually if we think of say research-based masters, or where you'd be doing like a thesis or major research project, let's say, one of the things that they might ask for is a statement of intent or a research statement. They might use that language. And when that is the purpose, within that document, it would be important to, number one, follow what guidelines they give you. That's 100% across the board. Read everything you can on what they're looking for in that document. And then you would likely be spending a little bit more time explaining what you want to research a bit further. So you would kind of use more academic language. You might indicate like who you'd be interested in studying with. If you've spoken to a potential supervisor prior to your application, that would be really important to highlight. But ultimately, when you consider the overarching goal of the document, it's basically like a written interview answering the question like, why do you want to attend this program? What skills do you have that can reassure us that you're going to succeed? And what interest and enthusiasm do you have like about our program? Like, why our program? And within there, try to incorporate a little bit about yourself so that your skills come across and knowledge about the subject area in that example. So you need to look for, so actually, and then on the flip side, there's a different kind of, application statement. Those might be called, it might be called a personal statement or a statement of intent. Essentially, it's the similar kind of document, but let's say it's for, say, a program like law school, or a program like I did, like in counseling and psychology, or social work or something. That focus may incorporate more of one's story. So, and it might be a little bit more personal in terms of sharing experiences. Certainly there has to be an academic flavor in there, absolutely. But the tone may be maybe slightly different. So again, following the instructions are super important, but really what you're looking for is like a critical reflection of what leads you to apply to this program, why you think you're going to succeed. And the biggest advice that I can kind of give people is recognize that writing those statements always take longer than you think. So because they always take longer than you think, it's good to start early and start a brainstorm process. Really critically reflect, why do you want to attend this program? Research the program, maybe write down the things that are of interest to you. Maybe there's a specialization you're going to take. Maybe there's particular courses. Maybe there's a pretty amazing professor or professors that you'd like to work with that really align with your interests, whatever those might be. So once you do, and then you might want to critically reflect your experiences too, so that on your statement, no matter what kind of type for the program that you're applying to, it demonstrates that you've really been thoughtful about why you want to attend a graduate program, and that you're conveying your ability to succeed in that kind of advanced learning community. So that's it in a nutshell. But one of the last kind of tip I'll leave you with is when you start writing them, it's like an essay, and just like an essay, really focus on trying to draw the reader in right off the bat. And ideally think about it in terms of trying to incorporate like a theme. Theme statements usually are really a great way to kind of pull all the information together and make it a really cohesive statement. So get people to read through it for sure in terms of grammar, spelling, cohesiveness, and you might even ask a professor that you know to read through it and get some advice on what you're sharing about your interest in research, for example.
A lot of information to take in. But I think this is a really good time that anyone can hear this to prepare for their graduate applications. That would be starting relatively soon for those who might be in fourth year. So this is really good information to collect. So just a follow-up question to the application process and CVs and resumes. I know some students feel like they don't make the greatest connections to their professors, and this is all in reference to academic references that graduate application ask for. And personally, I feel like this is myself included. So how do you suggest people like myself should approach getting these academic references? And if there are any alternatives, what would they be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's a really common source of concern for many folks. I think the short answer is the graduate applications are going to require an academic reference. The only exception to that would be if, let's say, you were waiting usually about 5 to 10 years, they might consider you more of a mature student. And sometimes then you could email them and say, you've lost contact and is there any other options? But truly the answer to that is going to be dependent on the program to which you're applying. Generally speaking, for anyone considering grad school, it would be advisable to just expect that you're going to need to provide 1, 2, 3 academic references. So to do your best in trying to foster those connections, like whether it's through attending office hours, asking questions during class, or participating in discussion, maybe consider like smaller courses that you might have taken later on in your term can be good, or perhaps a professor that you might have worked with. Those can be pretty strong references. But ultimately, yeah, there will be a requirement for that. With some alumni that I've worked with that have maybe had lost touch with some of their professors, some of them actually took a couple courses and did that after graduation and kind of got to know their professor at that time. But either way, I would highly recommend reaching out, talking to your professors. They are there to support you and they know the system well with graduate school. So let them know that you're thinking about applying to master's programs, get their advice. It will be helpful. And that way, when it comes down to it, you can, if you have that relationship, you can ask them if they'd be willing to support your application that way. The other type of reference that you might come across would be for professional-based programs, and they're called professional references. So that would be, for example, programs that are, say, counseling requires them, MBA. Those would be, usually it would be someone who supervised you, ideally who's in that field, and they would write a reference as well. But generally, even for the professional-based programs, you'll be expected to contribute an academic reference or two.
So don't hesitate to reach out to your professors. That's what I'm going to take out of that.
Absolutely. That is absolutely the important component. Don't hesitate. Just and I know sometimes it can be a bit daunting, and I remember that well from my own experience of having to reach out 2 years later after graduation, and I basically had to send a message going, remember me, in a really interesting way. I said, to help them remember, I sent them a paper that I had written, reminding them the courses that I was in, what marks I got in those courses, let them know what my future goals were for graduate school, and just simply asked if they would be willing to provide me a positive reference to support my application. So yeah, definitely don't hesitate.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you said the professors are there to support you. So even as daunting as it may sound, they're there to help.
Yeah, just give them lots of time. Certainly there's some best practices, and we do have information handout on our website as well about best practices on how to ask for references. So do take a look at that and ensure that you plan early.
I will definitely take a look at that as well. So to just round out this section on graduate applications, what can I do in my undergraduate career to create the most effective graduate school application, especially in the context that some students may not have prerequisites to courses or possess the best GPA to be competitive in specific graduate programs? What could they do? And if possible, can you address these questions for those who are in their final year and are about to apply to grad school, but also for those who have time to prepare?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think it covers a couple of things that are always really important to kind of keep at the forefront of your planning of your courses. So the couple of things that you mentioned was if you recognize you're missing prerequisites. Number one, you'll have to one has to find a way to take those prerequisites before you can apply to the program. So because if you don't have the prerequisites when you apply, there's no sense in applying, because it's a prerequisite. So they need those courses in order to consider your application. So that's one, look for those opportunities. Number two, in terms of the GPA, so that's a really good question. So it kind of it's a bit of a complex question, but I guess one of the key things is to find out, number one, how does your program of choice calculate the GPA? So many programs will, for example, take either the average of your final year or the average of your last 2 years of full-time study, while others will do a cumulative average. So much like circling back, every grad school is different. Every GPA calculation is going to be different. And so doing those GPA calculations early on so that you kind of know where you stand is really helpful, because that will help you identify what programs where you meet at least the minimum GPA calculation, so you can apply strategically. But I would also recommend in this competitive landscape to go one step further and actually look for information on the site, probably under the frequently asked questions. They usually indicate what the average was of the last incoming year. So you get a sense of what the differential is, because it might say on the website, minimum average of B minus, but then when you talk to them, they might say, well, in fact, we're looking more at a B plus, A minus. So who knows, right? So it's important to kind of look at every school independently, because guaranteed your profile is going to be look differently from different institutions that value different things. So for example, there's some programs that might take more of a holistic approach in the admission evaluation. So that's all part, going back to that spreadsheet, it's really helpful to kind of identify all those things so you can really determine where you have the best shot and focus your energy and attention on that. So to clarify, if you're in your program, like you're kind of doing your undergraduate studies, then you have lots of time to do that. I can appreciate if you're in your final year or graduated, as many of the folks I see, it can be a little bit more stressful, but know that you can take prerequisites that you need to apply after your degree. And if people are in a situation of not meeting, say, the GPA, then I might recommend looking into alternatives of how to increase your GPA. It could be taking additional courses or doing a second degree. However, again, it's good to circle back to the place where you're applying just to make sure that that is the case. But with any case of trying to improve one's GPA, I would first find out what the average is of what they're looking for, and then do a hypothetical calculation. So let's say my GPA is a B, and they want a B plus. You would want to kind of create a hypothetical situation. Like if I took X number more courses and I got a hypothetical, say 12s in all of them, how many will I have to take in order for that average to bump up? Doing a hypothetical calculation is really important just for cost saving and get a sense of what the plan could be. And I would definitely encourage reaching out to the program, explaining the situation, seeing if they have any suggestions, as well as you can talk to us so we can help with trying to strategize as well.
That is some really good advice. Hypothetical questions and being able to look at that in a big picture type of scenario.
Yeah, and I guess like the other piece that comes to mind as well is that depending on sometimes like what the career goals are after of the individual, through conversations, sometimes we find that pursuing a master's program isn't necessarily the best way to get to where the person wants to go. There are wonderful like post-grad certificates at either through universities or mostly colleges that have co-op programs that are very specific and specialized. And so sometimes being open and flexible to the educational path that you wish to take can still get you to the same place, depending on the field, of course. But that's always something that I think is important to kind of keep in mind as well.